Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is not just another story, not just another political headline, not just another debate. This is about a moment that has shaken the world to its very core. A moment that has challenged the balance of global power, a moment that has boosted a nation's destiny and forced every other country to pay attention, the U.S.-Alaska meeting, a meeting that started as diplomacy and ended as a thunderclap echoing across continents. And in the middle of all this storm, India's power rose undeniable, unstoppable, unshakable. You see, when powerful nations meet, they don't just exchange words, they exchange visions, they exchange dominance. They exchange warnings, but in Alaska, something different happened. Something raw, something bold, something that exposed the truth of this new century. For decades, the United States had carried itself as the unchallenged force. The commander of economies, the leader of politics, the general of military might. But in that cold, sharp air of Alaska, the world saw cracks. The world saw hesitation, and the world saw other powers stepping into the spotlight with ferocity. And while many watched the clash between giants, another force quietly gained strength, another nation stood taller, another dream began to materialize, and that nation was India. Understand this, history does not change quietly. It changes with shockwaves. It changes when people realize the rules of the old game no longer apply. The Alaska meeting was one of those moments. For the first time, the dominance of the United States was openly questioned on its own ground, with words as sharp as blades and confidence as heavy as steel. And while the U.S. wrestled with its pride, other nations calculated, strategized, prepared. India looked at this meeting and saw opportunity. Opportunity to rise, to carve its own path, to no longer live in the shadows of others, but to command the respect it has always deserved. India has always had the ingredients of greatness. A massive population, a civilization older than most empires combined, a culture of resilience, a tradition of intelligence, a hunger for growth. But greatness is not about potential, it's about seizing the moment. And this moment came when the old world order began to fracture. The Alaska meeting was not just about two nations arguing across a table. It was about the birth of a new era where the balance of power no longer rests in one corner of the globe. And India recognized that. India knew that the cracks in the system were openings to step through, to rise higher, to dominate in technology, in strategy, in alliances, in pride. Let me tell you something, the world respects strength. Not weakness, not hesitation, not excuses. It respects power, clarity, and the courage to say, we will not be ignored. India's leaders, India's visionaries, India's people. They saw the Alaska meeting as proof that the era of being sidelined was over. And now the rise of India was not just possible, it was unstoppable. The Alaska meeting reminded the world that alliances are shifting. The United States can no longer dictate the rules without challenge. Other nations are bold enough to stand toe-to-toe, to fight back, to demand their place. And in that chaos, India emerged as the balancing force. Too strong to be dismissed, too important to be ignored, too ambitious to be restrained. You want proof? Look at the economy. Look at the way India is building a digital empire that rivals the biggest players. Look at the way India is creating military strength, self-reliance, independence. Look at the way India is saying to the world, if you don't buy our oil, we will sell it elsewhere. If you don't give us your technology, we will build it ourselves. If you don't respect us, we will make you respect us. And make no mistake, respect is not given freely. It is taken, it is earned, it is carved out through sacrifice, discipline, determination. India is earning it right now. Every policy, every investment, every stand on the world stage is chiseling away at the old perceptions and building the image of a power that cannot be overlooked. The Alaska meeting was simply the spark that lit the fire. But the fire is spreading fast, and once the fire burns this strong, you can't put it out. Do you know what truly shakes the world? It's not just when two powers clash. It's when a third power rises while no one is paying attention. It's when the underdog begins to roar louder than the giants. It's when the future refuses to wait politely for permission and instead kicks the door open. That is what India is doing. And that is why the Alaska meeting was more than a diplomatic event. It was the announcement of a new chapter in world history. Now listen, power is not just about armies or weapons, power is influence. Power is economic dominance, power is technological leadership, power is cultural pride, and India is building each of these brick by brick, with patience, with fire, with ambition. The world thought India would always be a follower. But the Alaska meeting showed that India has the potential to be the leader, to be the one others look to be the voice that cannot be silenced. When the U.S. was shaken, when the confidence of the so-called unchallenged leader cracked, India's confidence grew. India realized that the future was wide open, and now India is not just participating in the global race, it is rewriting the rules, and every time a nation stands taller, every time it refuses to be bent, every time it speaks with authority, the world pays attention. India is not asking for attention anymore, it is demanding it, it is commanding it. So ask yourself, why did the Alaska meeting matter so much? Because it showed us the truth. The truth that the old order is fading. The truth that the new order is being built. The truth that India is stepping into a role that will shape the next century, and the world cannot ignore it. They may resist it, they may challenge it, but they cannot stop it. India's power does not rise with permission, it rises with willpower, it rises with determination, it rises with people who refuse to quit, people who refuse to be dominated, people who refuse to bow down. That is the spirit of India. That is the spirit that the Alaska meeting ignited. And that is the spirit that will shake the world again and again until no one can deny where the future belongs. And I tell you this, the world has a choice. They can either recognize the power of India and build with it, or they can ignore it and be left behind, because India is not waiting. India is not slowing down. India is not begging for approval. India is accelerating, surging forward like a tidal wave that no wall can stop. This is not speculation. This is not a dream. This is reality. This is happening right now. And the Alaska meeting was the loud signal that told the world, get ready because India is coming. Every empire has its moment. Every nation has its rise. And when that rise begins, it cannot be stopped by speeches, by sanctions, by threats. It only grows stronger, and that is exactly what we are witnessing. A nation with fire in its heart, with steel in its soul, with vision in its eyes, pushing forward no matter the obstacle. That is why the world is shaken. That is why the balance of power is shifting. That is why India's time has arrived. So stand tall, embrace it, believe it, because history is not written by those who wait. History is written by those who act, and right now, India is acting with the power of a giant awakening after centuries of sleep. The Alaska meeting was not the end of a story, it was the beginning of a revolution, and this revolution will not be ignored. The meeting symbolized the dawn of India's leadership role in shaping the new world order. For decades, world politics was dominated by the same few actors, the same familiar powers who set the rules, enforced them, and demanded the rest of the globe follow. But history is not static, and power is not permanent. In Alaska, in that cold atmosphere where sharp words cut like ice, the entire planet witnessed a confrontation that stripped away illusions. The United States, for long the global hegemon, found itself challenged, its authority questioned, its dominance eroded. And while many eyes focused only on that clash, those who paid closer attention saw something even more profound. They saw the rise of another force. They saw India, not in the shadows, not as a follower, but as a nation prepared to step into the front lines of global leadership. That meeting, and the shockwaves it sent, became the symbolic marker of a new chapter. The chapter where India would not just participate in the world order, but shape it. What made this moment so powerful was not simply that the U.S. appeared shaken, but that the world realized the age of a single dominant power was ending. Multipolarity was no longer a theory, it was the reality of geopolitics unfolding live, and in this shift India had a unique position. Unlike many other nations, India was not trapped in dependence, not weakened by submission, not entirely bound by Western systems. India had spent years building the groundwork for sovereignty, economic sovereignty, technological sovereignty, and political sovereignty. It had taken careful steps to avoid being tied too tightly to any one bloc, while strengthening its relationships across different regions. This meant that when the old order cracked, India was not just prepared to survive, it was prepared to rise. Leadership in the New World Order is not just about power in the traditional sense. It is about credibility, it is about vision, it is about being seen as the voice that represents more than just national interests, but embodies the aspirations of millions beyond its borders. In Alaska, the cracks in U.S. authority left space for such a voice to emerge, and India was ready to fill that vacuum. For years, India had been positioning itself as a champion of developing nations, as a defender of sovereignty, as a leader of technological independence. The Alaska confrontation made clear that the world was hungry for a new kind of leadership, one that could challenge Western monopoly without simply replacing it with another. India's balanced approach, its refusal to bend entirely to the West or to the East, gave it that credibility. Look at how India has cultivated its strengths. The economy is not only vast, but diverse, capable of both industrial production and high-level innovation. The digital revolution underway in India is unlike anything seen elsewhere, with entire systems built at scale to handle hundreds of millions of users, from payment infrastructures to identity verification. These are not just conveniences, they are foundations of sovereignty in the digital age, and sovereignty is what leadership requires. The Alaska meeting highlighted that whoever controls their systems, their data, their technology, will control their future. India has been carving its independence in this space, and that independence is exactly what places it in a position to shape the coming order. The meeting also revealed something deeper, that respect in global politics is earned not by submission but by assertiveness. Those who stood firm in Alaska gained attention, even admiration, because they refused to be lectured or dominated. India, watching closely, understood the lesson. This was not the time for timidity. This was not the time for polite silence. This was the time to stand tall and project confidence, and India has done exactly that. Whether in oil negotiations, trade discussions, or security dialogues, India has become unapologetic about protecting its interests. That unapologetic stance is what the world expects from a leader. No one follows a voice that hesitates. They follow a voice that commands, a voice that declares, a voice that refuses to bow. The dawn of India's leadership is not just political, it is civilizational. When India speaks, it carries the weight of thousands of years of history, philosophy, and culture. This is not a new nation trying to establish itself. This is one of the oldest continuous civilizations, reminding the world of its endurance, its resilience, and its relevance. The Alaska meeting symbolized a shift where historical depth matters again. It is not enough to be wealthy. Nations want leadership that embodies continuity, dignity, and vision. India, with its heritage and its modernity fused together, provides exactly that. The old order based on Western dominance cannot offer this blend anymore. India can. That is why the symbolic weight of Alaska fell on India's side. Global leadership also requires alliances, but not the kind of alliances where one dictates and others obey. India has been practicing a new model of diplomacy, partnership without submission. It works with the United States, with Europe, with Russia, with Asia, but it does not allow itself to be trapped by any single side. This flexibility, this independence is the currency of leadership in the 21st century. When others saw the U.S. lose ground in Alaska, they began to search for alternatives, and India stood out as a trustworthy partner, not because it bends, but because it balances. Nations from Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and beyond recognize this quality. They see India as a leader that can bridge worlds, not divide them further. That perception was reinforced by the Alaska meeting, where the fragility of old dominance contrasted with India's steady, balanced rise. Consider the psychological impact as well. The Alaska confrontation shook confidence in the United States, but it also awakened confidence in nations that had long felt marginalized. If the old giant could be challenged, then the world could indeed change. And in that surge of belief, India became the beacon. Its progress in technology, medicine, space exploration, and digital governance became examples of what was possible outside the traditional Western orbit. Suddenly, countries looked at India not only as a fellow developing nation, but as a model to emulate, a leader to follow. The symbolism of Alaska was not just about weakness at the top. It was about new strength rising from the places once considered secondary. India embodied that rising strength. Leadership in the new order will not be given, it will be taken, and India has shown it is willing to take it. Through bold policy decisions, through independent stances on global crises, through building self-reliant industries, India has been carving its path. When the Alaska meeting unsettled the established order, it accelerated this process. It was as if the world stage suddenly had an opening, and India walked onto it without hesitation. This is how leadership begins, not with permission, but with presence. India is now present in every major global conversation, present not as a listener but as a contributor, a challenger, a decision maker. Another reason the Alaska meeting symbolized this dawn is that it exposed how fragile overdependence on one power can be. Smaller nations watching the clash realized they could not anchor their futures solely on the United States. They needed diversification, and who better to lead this diversification than India, a nation that itself has refused to be overly dependent on anyone. India's balanced diplomacy, its insistence on sovereignty, its refusal to be boxed into binary choices, suddenly looked like the model everyone else needed. This was not just about one meeting. It was about the lesson the meeting taught the world. And that lesson created fertile ground for India's leadership to grow. But leadership is also about courage. The Alaska meeting showed the world that courage is more valuable than compliance. Those who dared to speak boldly were remembered. Those who simply echoed old narratives were ignored. India, watching this unfold, understood that courage would define its role in the coming decades. Whether on issues of climate, trade, or security, India has begun to project that courage. It does not accept dictates. It negotiates on its terms. It does not collapse under pressure. It holds firm. And when a nation shows such courage consistently, it becomes the leader others rally around. Because people, whether individuals or nations, are drawn to strength. They respect those who refuse to bend. India's leadership role also emerges from its demographic power. The young population, the rising workforce, the vast human potential. This is not just statistics, it is momentum. The Alaska meeting shook the world partly because it reminded everyone that old powers are aging, declining in vitality. India, in contrast, represents energy, ambition, and hunger for progress. This demographic force, combined with national will, creates an unstoppable drive. The meeting symbolized a turning point where the world realized leadership would not come from aging empires, but from dynamic nations. And India stood as the clearest symbol of that dynamism. Economically, the New World Order is being rewritten around supply chains, around digital flows, around energy independence. India is strategically placing itself in each of these. When Alaska signaled that old guarantees were breaking, India became even more determined to secure its economic sovereignty. This determination is exactly what leadership requires. Leaders are not dependent, leaders are providers. India is moving from being a market to being a hub, from being a buyer to being a creator, and that transformation is what places it at the center of the emerging order. All of these elements, the vision, the sovereignty, the courage, the balance, the demographics, the economy, were crystallized in the symbolism of the Alaska meeting. It was the world's loud wake-up call that the age of one uncontested superpower is over. And in the silence that followed, India's presence filled the space. Leadership is as much about perception as it is about action, and perception changed after Alaska. The world began to see India differently. Not just as a rising power, not just as a participant, but as a leader shaping what comes next.